I'm just going to preview this by saying these are three of the biggest pieces of Common Sense American news in our 6-year history. I am a little bit pinching myself still. Okay. So, breaking news item 1. The Senate's Common Sense Coalition has agreed to explore with us picking the same issue to work on in 2025. That is that the Senate bipartisan group, and we look at if we could find agreement on the same issue to work on. Now, in our 3-for-3 track record, in each case, we have partnered closely with a Senate bipartisan group. It's loosely overall called the Common Sense Coalition. The exact composition of the group changes by issue, but on surprise medical billing, the Bipartisan Infrastructure, and the Electoral Count Reform Act, we work closely with these groups. So this is a long-standing relationship, and we have been discussing with them the possibility of what if we picked the same issue, like in advance. We kind of did this a little bit more. It's kind of turned out that way 3 times, but what if we did that in a little more planful way and a particular process for that, which I'm going to share in a minute. I've got pictures of Senator Lisa Murkowski, Republican from Alaska, and Senator Michael Bennet, Democrat from Colorado, who are going to co-chair a process by which the Senate considers our input, the Senate bipartisan group considers our input into what issue they pick, and we consider their input. And they are co-chairing that process for us. And that we got that agreement just a little over a week ago from them. Second piece of breaking news is that the House's bipartisan working group is interested in also exploring picking the same issue. So that is, we have the lead bipartisan working group in the Senate, the lead bipartisan working group in the House, and the lead bipartisan grassroots organization working in Congress, Common Sense American, all explore, hey, might we be able to pick the same issue to all work on, so that we not only have the bipartisan power to try to do some sane problem solving in the midst of these raw political differences, but that we have the bi-chamber, both the House and the Senate working with us on it. And then on the strength of those two developments, that has pretty splashy, to use a technical term for it, that we're pulling off. That's quite a testament to the kind of stature we have developed in the Congress. On the strength of that, we have invited, and he has accepted, to add an additional co-chair to the National Institute for Civil Discourse Advisory Committee, which is, Common Sense American has a program of that. And so former Republican Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott has agreed to be the NICD co-chair, joining former Democratic Senate Majority Leader, sorry, left his name off here, Tom Daschle, and former Governor Christy Todd Whitman as NICD co-chair. So that gives us a strong Republican, a strong Democrat, and then of course Christy Todd Whitman has left the Republican Party and has founded the Forward Party, and so kind of a centrist. So we really have a prominent set of co-chairs who really represent the range in the country, and they are helping us convene this group and inviting the senators and the members of the House to join in this process with us. So these are all just really exciting pieces of news. So I want to kind of flesh out what that means a little bit. I can imagine that you might say, well, okay, sounds good, but what exactly are we talking about? So let me start with kind of the fundamental guiding principles for the kind of cooperation and taking into account each other's views that undergirds the agreement that we're forming with these groups. So the most important first point to make, I think, is that no one of the three groups, not us, not Common Sense America, not the Common Sense Coalition in the Senate, not the bipartisan working group in the House is giving up their independent decision-making authority on what issue we choose to work on, right? We all retain for ourselves at the end of the day that, we will ultimately pick our own issue. We're interested in considering yours, but we haven't given up. We've just said, well, whatever you choose as an issue is the issue that we'll choose. That is not what we've done. So each is simply agreeing to consider the other group's views when we are choosing an issue, to kind of take that into account, let that inform our thinking as we make our own choice. But in doing that, we all recognize the ability to advance sound bipartisan problem solving just goes up enormously for each of the three groups, including us, if we're all working on the same issue and rowing together. And so that then, gets us to the original topic for the night. The prospect for taking on a bigger, tougher issue and doing it successfully, where we can actually move the ball and Congress might actually pass sane legislation on that tougher issue, goes up several fold if we are doing it in conjunction with the leading Senate bipartisan working group and the leading House bipartisan working group. So those are some of the guiding principles. And then here's a little bit about how the process will work. And there, some details still being worked out. Let me just say the Senate group has agreed to work with us in this way. And so they've made that commitment. The bipartisan working group in the House has expressed keen interest in it. We've had a couple of meetings with them and some email exchanges back and forth. And they are currently kind of going through the process to decide informally if they will commit to this process. Again, it's committing to a process, not committing to, yeah, we will pick, we'll pick whatever issue you pick. No, nobody is saying that. So here's the steps that we'll go through. So the first step is how it's worked in the past is we will create our top 10 bipartisan issue list by going to the senators and representatives and asking them what they see as the most promising bipartisan issues for 2025. So this is exactly what we've done in the past. We create the top 10 list for members to consider. And the way we generate that is we ask them, and by promising, we say, what do you see as the most meaningful issues that are ripe for bipartisan action this year? That is, they would matter to the American people. It's a good combination of mattering to the American people. And there's enough bipartisan interest that you could imagine you could actually get it done. It's not an absolutely impossible task. So we try to find that best combination of meaningful and achievable, and or at least the 10 issues that have the best combination of that from these interviews with senators and representatives. And that's exactly what we've done in the past. And as in the past, we'll rank order that list from 1 through 10 from most to least promising in their view. Now that just sets us up then to figure out what our own view is. And that's the second bullet here is then all of us in Common Sense American will rate those 10 issues. And, we'll ask, as we've done in the past, say, take into account, consider what the members of Congress are telling us can get done and can't get done and what's meaningful or not. Let that inform your decision, but not dictate it. Just give you good information to help you make your own decision on that. Then third, we will share the rank order from all of you with the House and Senate groups. And the Senate has committed, the House is the Senate Bipartisan Working Group, the Common Sense Coalition has committed, and the House is considering that they'll say, yeah, we'll take your views into account as we're figuring out what issue we think we should work on as a group, recognizing that if we work with you on the same issue that you want to work on, and you can demonstrate where there's bipartisan grassroots consensus, it would really boost our work. So we got to think about doing issues that you're interested in. And then then, we don't know exactly how that might come out. If, we're close and our number one issue is the Senate and the House's group number two issue and vice versa, or if we just all kind of come out and agree with the same one, or we're a little further off. So, we'll kind of see where that comes out. And then everybody, if we don't kind of automatically and pretty readily just land on the same issue to work on, then we'll say, okay, do we need a few more steps in the process here? And for us, that might include, we come back to you for a second round of your input and say, okay, we gave them your input, and with that input, here's where they are. And, it might be they're willing to work on any of these three issues and want you to pick which of those three, or, there might be some second round. But again, at the end of the day, we take their perspectives and views as input into our own decision making, and we can choose to work on an issue with one or both groups, or say, yeah, we're sorry, we don't quite agree on this. We're going to go ahead and work on a different issue than you are, than it looks like you guys are going to work on. So that's the process by which that'll happen. I can imagine that you have lots of questions about the details of how that will work, and some of those details are being worked out. The timing is probably roughly in January and February. We would be interviewing the senators and representatives to get their views. Hopefully by late February, maybe early March, we would have the top 10 issues for all of you to rate. So the second step in the issue, and second step in the process. And then so by mid to late March, early April, then we can take our results back to the House and Senate groups, the third step. And so, somewhere in late March, April sometime, hopefully coming to consensus on which issue we work on. And then whatever issue we pick, we go to work developing the brief that you review, and then we get the brief up and get the results in. There will be a second round of discussion if we end up on the same issue about exactly how we're going to work together. But one of the things that we've offered up is we'll do our brief and share that with you, of the strongest arguments for and against each of the proposals under consideration, as well as, our members' views on that. And you'll maybe recall on both the Electoral Count Reform Act and on the House Bipartisan Workforce Pell Act, those bills, in fact, were shaped by our input. Before those bills got introduced, we shared our early results with those groups. And so the shape of the bill changed because of our input. So that's one of the ways in which working with these groups really vastly increases our ability to inform what the Congress does. Is it may actually not only help the legislation pass, but it may help shape the legislation, where they say, oh, well, there's 78% bipartisan agreement on this approach to it, but not much bipartisan agreement on that. Maybe we ought to go this way. So it increases our chance to shape the legislation as well as help it pass. So that's the process that we'll go through. So I want to come back now to the question of tougher issue, that we look through that question through the lens of knowing that we've got this prospect of working with these groups that could really build our capacity to take on a tougher issue. So I think it's useful, as Cheryl indicated, Carrie Kirk had this kind of nice alliteration for the different ways that the issue might be tougher. Might be tougher in that it's such a big deal because it's consequential. It will have such a big impact. And so people are really invested in it, and it makes it a little tougher to do a significant policy because it's so big in terms of its consequences. It might be a tougher issue because it's complex. It's just got the particulars, the substance of it is really complex. Or it might be tougher because it's controversial. Controversial makes the three, the alliteration work. I like a little bit more maybe the newsy part of it, that it's some issues are going to be kind of front and center because the White House or major groups in the Congress are working on it. So it's in the news every day. And so it's getting a lot of attention. So it's tougher in the sense it's a crowded space, but and so I might you might think about controversial and polarized, but there's another aspect of that that's sort of newsy. So controversial doesn't fully capture that part of it. So we want to just lay out kind of a couple of the pro and con arguments of picking a tougher issue. On the pro side, it gives us a chance to have a larger impact on the nation's policies. These are, the big issues. And so we can have a big impact if we successfully weigh in on those and bring our common sense to the issues that need it most. It's okay. Yeah, it's a tougher hill to climb, but that's where they need us most. And so maybe we ought to be, directing our capacity or, on our demonstrated capacity with a 3-for-3 track record. Maybe we ought to be dedicating that to where it's needed most. And, maybe more members complete the brief if we're taking on a tougher kind of, maybe that makes it more interesting in some way and more engaging. And just to give you a little data on that. So for the 4 issues we've taken on so far, here's the percentage of the membership who actually completed the brief. And you'll see there's a lot of variance. So with the high watermark being in 2021 on physical infrastructure, where we had nearly 20% of our members weigh in. And this year is actually the low watermark, where we're at about 4.3%. We're actually a little higher than that now. We're probably a little bit over 5% now, I think, because more have come in since we run those numbers. But that's a 4-fold difference between physical infrastructure and career-connected learning. And so, we don't know exactly what accounts for the differences in response rates. But it seems like it might be something about the issue itself. And the physical infrastructure, in terms of our 3 Cs, was certainly consequential. We're all affected by the nation's infrastructure. It was certainly complex. That was probably our most complex brief ever. And it was not so much controversial as newsy. It was just in the news every day. I think that'd be my guess as to why that had the highest response rate, is because it's in the national news every day. And you're like, hey, I have a chance to weigh in on this. Whereas career-connected learning is not in the news every day. And so I think that's my best guess as to why that might be. So those are some of the issues, some of the reasons in favor of taking on a tougher issue. But, at Common Sense American, we always look at both sides of the question. And, what are some of the reasons not to take on a tougher issue? One is our track record might slip. If we're taking on things that are harder to get done, then, the chances that we prevail go down. And that may impact our kind of ability to make a difference in the future, because, we don't seem as influential. It might impact our ability to attract new members to join us, which the larger our membership, the more the ability we have to make a real difference. And maybe taking on a tougher issue doesn't raise the number of the number of members who respond. Maybe it goes down. Maybe they say, geez, a complex issue. I don't want to do another infrastructure brief like we did. That thing was too hard. And this issue sounds hard. Or if they're really more controversial than newsy, it's like, that issue is just too tough and people are just too angry about it. Like, that's exhausting to work on that one. No, thank you. And so maybe it doesn't increase response rates. I guess one way I would frame the decision is a high risk, high gain. Taking on a bigger, tougher issue is a higher risk in the sense of harder to prevail, but higher gain if we do prevail, then it has a bigger impact. And that risk reward ratio, I think part of why these bipartisan working group prospects are so interesting is that makes the risk reward ratio much better. We have a much better chance of prevailing, taking on even a tougher issue if we're working with them than if we're not. And so it kind of changes that pro and con argument So whatever we might have thought a couple of weeks ago before these developments about the pros and cons, the pro argument got strengthened quite a bit by the prospect of being able to work with these leading Senate and House groups. So given how narrow the divides are in Congress, that really makes our work important and makes it possible for us to be effective and makes these bipartisan working groups really effective. The press really is misleading when they talk about who now has control of the House and the Senate and the White House. The founders of this country really designed the system primarily so that you could not do things on a purely partisan basis. And that becomes even more true when the groups are evenly divided. And if you look at over the last 5 or 6 years, Jack helped lead an analysis of this for us. The major legislation that's been passed, it has been almost entirely the Senate bipartisan working group that we're working with. And so the 3 issues that we've worked on, Surprise Medical Billing, Infrastructure, Electoral Count Reform Act, but add to that also the Chips and Sciences Act, Safer Communities Act, the Respect for Marriage Act, every single one of those. So policymaking wasn't driven out of the Speaker's house. The Speaker of the House's office wasn't driven out of the Senate Majority Leader's office, wasn't even driven out of the White House. It was the Senate Bipartisan Working Group, because we have a system that won't allow you to do things on a purely partisan basis, and we have a very evenly divided Congress. And those groups that are at the center of us are saying, yeah, we'll work with you. I mean, it's just stunning to me. And it hats off to the work all of you have done over the last couple of years to get us to that spot that we have that kind of standing. I just couldn't be prouder than to be shoulder to shoulder with all of you in this good work. Thanks for joining us tonight, and thanks for all the good work you do.